So like I said, today is our 5th webinar since the year started. We've been at this, and I'd like to say we are getting pretty good at it. And today's webinar is about how to design a single sign-on module, SSO. I don't know why I was reading it as SE or search engine optimization. Anyway, today we're going to look at how to design a single sign-on module, and our objectives, at least what we hope from the people that are attending this, is that they'll be able to understand what SSO is, how to design systems with SSO in mind, and what changes come with implementing SSO, and also what challenges and the solutions to these challenges. And at the end, I hope and I know that the conversation is going to be very interesting. The panelists will respond to the questions raised. So why this topic? Like I said, this is our 5th webinar. The last one we had was about DevOps, how to manage your deployment. Remember, you can always head over to our YouTube channel for any that you may have missed. And today we are again responding to what the community requested from us, and we'll be discussing how to do SSO. So that's how we ended up on this topic. And with me today, we have Remo, Samuel, Paul. Guys, I would say clap for Remo. He's our backend architect. We have Martha Najinda. She's also our backend architect. And then we have me, who will be your host. Martha and Remo, please say hi to the attendees.
Hello, hopefully you guys can hear me now.
And they see you.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, Martha.
It's nice to be here.
Good to have you. Great. So a few housekeeping rules. Remember, we have a Q&A channel that we'll be using. If there's anything that's discussed, if you need clarity on something, feel free to drop your thoughts in the Q&A channel as the conversation is going. We'll attend to the questions at the end, like I hinted earlier. I already gave you the flow. We'll talk about what SSO is, how to implement it, the challenges and that you encounter while implementing SSO, the solutions, and hopefully at the end of the webinar, we'll leave with the confidence that we are SSO gurus, or at least SSO guru hopefuls. So without wasting more of your time, we want to see, based on our audience, right? What is the understanding of SSO? Remember, the poll will be launched on your screen. Select, we'll share the results, then we'll dive into them. So our first poll is about if you have worked with SSO before. We have 1 minute. Keep your votes coming, keep your votes coming. Lynn, I know you're on call. Have you worked with SSO before? Have you heard of it? Did you also think it was SEO like me?
Trust me, you're better than me. I thought it was a lot of things. At some point I called it SOS. You know, SOS is a very common thing with mobiles. So most of the time I keep thinking, source. But
SSO, not SEO, not source, but
single sign-on.
Yeah, single sign-on. So I see the votes are coming in. 12 people have voted so far. We're waiting for 2 more people to cast their votes, and we can discuss the results. And okay, I think we'll have them vote. I will show the results. Guess what? Remo and Martha, I think you're in business. We have 10 people who voted, and 4 said yes, they have worked with SSO before. That's 33%. We have 7 that say they have not worked with SSO before. And then we have 1 person who said it's the first time they've heard about SSO. So I think we are in luck. And Remo, Martha, I know you've had to implement this at the moment. Let me not spoil the party, but we'll be hearing from Martha then. Based on the results, now that you know people haven't heard about SSO, Martha is going to give us an overview of what SSO is. Martha?
Thank you. So as Viola and Lynn have been discussing, SSO is just another version of single sign-on. And when you hear single sign-on, it's defined as an authentication scheme whereby you can use a single set of user ID and password to access multiple applications. So I'll try to give an example, and this will try to reflect why SSO? Why did people have to think of SSO? What was it solving? So on a typical day or daily basis, when you are a developer or a non-developer but working for a company or working on some in a typical day, you can access multiple applications. I'll give an example, like you need to open your Slack, you need to open your calendar. You'd also need to open, for example, Jira, where your tasks for a day are outlined. You'd also need to use Zoom for the meeting. So you can see you need to access 4 multiple applications. So why SSO? In all these applications, you would need to log in, have access. So SSO comes in to solve the issue of having to log into each of those 4. Like you have to log into Zoom, you have to log in your calendar, you have to log into Jira to see your tasks. So as you can see, it would be hard for you to remember a password for each of those accounts. So that's where SSO comes in from. So when you look at the nutshell or the pictures on the screen, which explain SSO, on the left side, we have an image of a user trying to access 4 applications. They will have to log in the first application, and password, as on and so on. But with single sign-on, with SSO, they only need to log in into one system with a single user ID and password. Then they can be able to access all these applications. So that's okay.
Martha, interesting that you mentioned we have password managers, right? They also help us store our passwords and help us log into different sites or platforms that we're visiting. Would password managers also pass for SSO?
Not really, because password managers like they store passwords depending on the site trying to access. But with SSO, it's about using that single set of credentials and you access multiple applications. So password managers, they are quite different from SSO because for them, they just store for you the credentials you use what on a specific site they have saved for.
So like how I have a Gmail account and I can access Google Drive, Google Photos, that's single sign-on, right?
Yeah, that would explain, that was a best example of single sign-on because you're using your Gmail, like using your password and you can access the photos, you can access the drive, you can access mail themselves. So you are using one set of login credentials and then you access multiple applications. best example of SSO.
Awesome. So, I mean, why should I have a single sign-on module? What is in it for me?
Yeah, so as you can see there, we have an outline list of SSO. So basically, as you can see, if you use one set of user credentials, you don't have to remember each password for all the multiple applications you're going to use. So that fatigue, it's lessened or it's totally removed. You don't have to worry about, I need to remember password of Zoom, I need to remember password of my calendar and all. Then the beauty of SSO is that authentication or verification of your details is done once by a single system. Then you can access other applications. Um, then it can also, SSO help you to like get to know your customers, or the KYC stand on your customers. So if you have user data in one place, so you can get to know people in different applications. So if you are, let me say, a manager, you can get to see user details from different applications. You access them in a central place. That is the SSO system you're using. So that means it's easy to manage users from these different applications with SSO. And then you can also manage their roles in these applications from the SSO system. So you can use one system, you manage users in different applications, then you give roles and permissions, you can even change them as an admin. So besides having benefits for the customers or users themselves, there are also benefits as developers we could get if we adopt SSO. For
Okay.
example, yes, Viola, you have a
No, I mean, as you're selling SSO, but I believe our audience are mostly developers, so I like this part.
yeah, that's great. So if you have like a single sign system, you can get to avoid repetition while writing your code. For example, if you have one system that does the authentication, you could use it in other applications. So you get to not repeat yourself writing authentication process all the time. Then if you've ever heard of microservices, this is where like you build different systems which will work together. So imagine you have like 4 subsystems, and then at some point they work together and they all need authentication.
Yeah.
SSO could be like a starting point for those services. So it will also do when you're working with microservices. And then, not to mention, it makes it easier for you to add different or more authentication factors and forms. So you can continue to update your user forms in different applications, but you do it one the SSO system. So it has quite like, so I could say
Um,
it's a good feature. Yes, I
No, I think so very, very interesting benefits that you share. I know we have developers on the call, so for those that at least get a feel of how they would benefit from implementing SSO, we are open to your feedback. But then also, now that we have Remo, who is a backend architect, I'm curious to hear his perspective as a developer, what his benefits of SSO have been. I don't want to serve the food before it's ready, but Remo, what have been your benefits of implementing SSO?
So I think the major one on my side has been the fact that I do not have to write another like user model password reset every time I'm starting a new app, right? So that means once I'm presented with a new application that we're doing for Tunga, the point that we are starting at is building actual features of that application, right? We're not going through or we need to email templates or set up users and passwords and things like that. So I think it's just a great starting point to get a lot more done much quicker, right? So I think that for me has been my biggest takeaway with us implementing this.
Awesome, awesome. And like you've heard from Remo, he's implemented SSO for Tunga. And before we get into the details, I want us to have a second poll. Now that you have an overview from Martha, do you now have stuff that clicks for you when the term SSO is managed? So we are looking at OAuth 2.0, we are looking at OpenID, we're looking at social media login, we're looking at SAML, we're looking at secure auth and Active Directory, to mention but a few. But then again, instead of having you put your hands up, I might as well just launch the second poll. And remember, we have 1 minute, then we'll share the results, then we'll discuss them, and then we'll get into our next phase. Starting begins now. Voting begins now, sorry. I see we have 25 people. Keep the votes coming, keep the votes coming. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Lean, sorry, I have to keep picking on you, but for you, what comes to your mind when you hear that term SSO?
SSO, now that I'm from the source, now that I know some bits of what it's about, I would think OpenID, you know, more of something that a one-time use kind of, you know, open to everything else, to every account. That's what would come to my growing developer mind.
Awesome, awesome. So the results are in. I'll be sharing them. Thank you for voting, and wait for it. Ta-da! So the majority of the people, what comes to their mind when they hear the term SSO, they think OAuth 2.0. The second group, actually, OpenID and social media login are in tie. Then and Active Directory, so those got the same percentage. Then lastly, we have secure auth and SAML got 0. Maybe Bremo, could you hint on what exactly, which of these applies to SSO?
Okay, yeah. So with regards to the poll, actually, the poll is a lot of these apply with SSO, right? So
Okay.
in some shape or form, all these technologies help in what do you call it, in implementing or achieving the whole point of having a single user login into various systems. Like Lynn had said, things like OpenID and Auth 2.0 are like mechanisms that help developers achieve SSO, right? In there, we have also social media login, which we shall touch on a bit, because it kind of fulfills the mantra of I have one account and I can sign into various applications with it. But I think a lot of these there would be buzzwords in the SSO realm, right? So if you've heard of these words, you've probably heard of SSO, right? But these are more on the technological terms, yes.
No, it was SSO. I mean, I log in with Facebook everywhere I go, or yeah. Cool. So now that we've had an overview of what SSO is, we've seen what comes to your mind when you hear the term SSO. Let's go to the actual implementation, and this is the fun part because Remo is going to share with us real life case scenarios, how they're doing it in Tunga. So Remo.
Right. So before we get into how we're implementing it at Tunga or how we're using this, this is how you may see SSO in like the real world, right? So in a lot of the enterprise world, you'll hear of tools like Okta, you'll hear tools like Auth0, which are like software as a service services for SSO, right? So like with like Okta, everything is put into the Okta system and then is linked from there, right? Like from the screenshot, you can see that if someone has access to like an Okta instance, right? That company can add their Slack there, they can add their Zoom there and a few other things, right? So that means if you are able to log into this one point, right, you can access various systems, right? The example that keeps coming back, which I think is a great example because it just works, is the Google suite of things, right? So Gmail, Google Apps, Google Docs, Google Sites, Google Photos, right? Because you sign in at one point, right? And then you have access to the others, right? And also where they even take it a notch higher is that if you have the Google Apps for Business or Google Apps for Work, you as the IT team of your organization can have your apps added into that, right? So imagine having your an app that may, let's say you have a third-party accounting software, right? So if someone goes to that page and they say login, they're redirected to a Google page, and then that Google page redirects them back to your app, right? So you're just plugging into this ecosystem that Google has already built, right? Before that, me and Viola had touched on the bit of, so it's in red because it's a bit on the fence, but let's say if I have two applications, right? One is maybe, let's say, an accounting app, and the other is, let's say, payment, right? And if I come and I log in with my Gmail on one, and then with my same Gmail, I log in on the other one, right? I've access to apps, and to those apps, I am the same user because the user who is accessing both of these systems is actually the same person, right? So it plays a bit on the edge, but you can use it to achieve SSO because that user is unique to itself, right? So it's the same user that signed into one app and is the same user signing into the other app, which achieves the whole point of SSO, right? But this is what we see in the real world, usually in the enterprise world with big companies and all that. So we're going to talk about how it relates or how we've been implementing it for Tunga.
Awesome. There we go.
Right. So I don't know how many of you are aware, but so Tunga has, right now, I think we have 3 apps. So one is the platform that you all know, where we post projects and a few, like we post projects and all your opportunities go to, right? That's one system. That was the first system that we had. And then we ventured into building a system where we would test users, right? So if you're a developer, you've probably been sent an email from Viola and her team to ask you to take tests and submit the results back to her, right? Tunga is building a system that can have that fully integrated, right? So that when you say you're a Python developer, we send you, you do a Python test, and there's no emailing back and forth. Your score is right there so that we can get you placed, right? And then the last one is Tunga Academy, which we launched recently. And I think our last webinar was about that, right? So with the growing with the growing systems in Tunga, we thought it would be a nice point to start considering, because you're the same user across all these systems, right? And that's when we thought it would be a nice point to now begin our thought process into SSO. And we've been doing this for maybe 1.5 months now. So we thought we would present and have this conversation in case it came up and triggered more conversations between what client work we do or how we are doing this, and basically talk to our developers, because this is a very technical subject.
Yeah, like you meant, we actually did hint on it. It was at the end of our last webinar, so guys can check it and watch it about why we are doing it and how we intend to do it.
Yeah, so what we're going to go through is examples of how we would design SSO or how we've done it. So this would work if you're building a system with SSO in mind, or if you're taking a system that didn't have SSO and adapting it, like kind of what we did, right? So at the basis of SSO is the user, right? Because this user has to access various systems, right? And the starting point for all of this is to define what your core user identity is, right? So on the left, you see there that we had, because we had started with platform, right? We had a lot of fields on our core user model, right? So we had street, we had city, we had address 1, address 2, and things like that, right? So because all of these fields would not make sense across all the 3 apps, what you're doing is you're defining a core user, which is the user that you're going to use across all the 3 apps, right? And usually these fields for better have to be filled in, right? So the fields that you have at this point are things like first name, last name, an email address, what country these are from. These are fields that are required from the get-go. So when you're defining your core user, it's very advisable to have fields that are required at that point, right? We're not saying all these other fields are not required, things like address and things like that, but we'll come to a point where we put on them. So we'll come to a point where we can place them differently. But for the start is define a core user, right? And this is the user that makes sense to Tunga. In your application, there may be another thing that you find core. You may need a user's phone number, or you may need a user's picture, or things like that, right? So define what is core across all the systems as your starting point, right?
So these are common fields across the different platforms, from what I gather.
Yes, across the different platforms. So these fields will be accessed across all the 3 apps, or all the apps that you use SSO to sign in on. Right? And then from there, because depending on the particular system, you may require different fields. So here, the example that we're giving is the Tunga platform, right? So we have SSO in the middle, where we've defined our core user, right? And then we're going to split them, right? So Tunga platform, right? Because that's where our developers get paid and clients log in, right? That bit there is where we'll have payment info, things like Pioneer, your address, if it's a client, whether we're going to charge them VAT or not, and then we go from there and see. So that's the extra profile now that we're adding to the core user, right? And on the develop side, we have things like programming language, test results, whether these test results can be shown to a client, and things like that. So we're separating the concerns, right? Because platform does not need to know if your results need to be shown to a client or not. That is logic that is best described in Tunga testing, or I think it's called develop, right? So this is just to separate those concerns, but your core user is still the same, right? And also, if there are some points where you need to add access to you need to add like another app that does not have core fields, you can just import your SSO user and then go from there, right? You don't need to add fields, right? If the first name, username, and email work, then you just import from there and you move on.
Okay.
So yes, so this currently is what we have been building. So we have an SSO instance, right? So what we did is we separated the concerns with just different domains for now. So our SSO instance will be hosted, and I'm guessing you'll have access to this in a few coming weeks and all that. We are finalizing. So our SSO instance will be hosted like separately, right? So we'll migrate all the users that we have from platform, that we have from testing, and merge them into our SSO instance, right? And our SSO instance will be hosted at like id.tunga.io, right? And that's where we will have all our users. From the screenshot, if you're very inquisitive, yeah, you'll notice that it's a Django, it's a Django app. We at Tunga, especially the internal team, uses a lot of Django. I think it gives us a use case. Like the admin is a very nice use case that we use it for. So not that we're saying that SSO cannot be implemented in anything else. This is what we choose to implement it.
You have
This
to
is what we
Django to implement SSO.
No. So you, it's what we have because it's what our other two apps are written in and what our developers currently are proficient in, right? But you can implement these concepts in Laravel, in Rails, in Java, and in anything that really any programming language or framework can have SSO implemented in it, right? So the top there is tunga.id, right? Which will then serve the logins and the password resets and all that for platform, which is on your left, and then Tunga testing on your right? So now, if at any one point we needed to add another application, right? We're not going to rewrite user modules or anything like that. We're just going to spin up that server, connect it to our SSO instance, and tell our users, hey, now you can access, I don't know what else we would like to build. I don't know. Oh, now you can access another app, right? And because we present this as what's it called, as a REST API, the terms of thinking of accessing this may not only be for web apps, right? So down the road, if Tunga decides to build, let's say, a co-working space, we can pull data from this for you to get access to the building, right? So things like, all right, you are a Tunga developer, that means you get access to the building, right? And this is where we talk about the ease of adding other factors, right? So if we add fingerprint in there, we could find a way to program this to door access or event attendance and things like that, right? And this is possible because we have extracted this out, right? Hopefully that makes sense.
So interesting, Remo, that you mentioned. I think the other scenario I thought about while you were discussing was being a student. So you're given one .edu ID, and it's what you use maybe to pay your tuition, to access your course material, to access the library. And so when you are talking about SSO, I think I was reminded of when as a student and we just had one ID, but it opened many gates.
Yeah, that's true. So yeah, those are the scenarios that SSO can be leveraged in.
Awesome. So I think very, very interesting insights, especially for people that are part of our community. And for those of you who missed the intro, Remo and Martha are backend architects. So they're implementing this and it will be live. Let's get into the third poll. So remember, I launched the poll, you have a minute to vote, we go over the discussion. And for this poll, right, you've heard from Remo, you've heard from Martha, and you're probably developers and now your minds are working. I could implement the SSO, I could recommend the company I'm working with with to take this approach. So we just want to see if you get the gist of the conversation so far as we plan to wind up. I will be launching the third poll and you can start voting. So as a developer, is it if a company has multiple applications which are used by staff members on a daily basis? Is it if a company has one application that staff members interact with on a daily basis and more applications they use once in a while? Is it if a company has one application, but they are thinking about creating more applications in the future, or do you just not know? Yeah. And for also, if you're on this call and you're not a developer, but you get the gist, please feel free to participate. Don't say, oh, we're leaving you out and we are being segregative. Yeah, we have 3 more minutes and we close this up. Keep the votes coming. And we should be wrapping up. 3 more people, please cast your vote. 2 more people, 2 more people. And yeah, so the results are in, and wait for it. Ta-da! So the highest number of people say, and that's 94%, they say if a company has multiple applications which are used by staff members on a daily basis, followed by if a company has one application, but they're thinking about creating more applications in the future. So Remo, was this what you expected, or do you see a spin there in the responses?
No, this is what was expected, right? But I think the extra point on this is you don't have to wait for your company to have multiple applications, right? You can define your core user identity from the start, right? Which makes it easier to branch off much later, right? You don't have to wait because like us, what we did was we had cluttered our user field, right? We could have started with a simplified one, which would make our work much easier, right? So the fact that your company does not have multiple user applications now does not mean they're not going to, right? So just plan from the start, right? And it will save you some bit of leverage.
Awesome. And if it's anything to at least of all the people that have attended, at the start, we had people saying they haven't heard of SSO, and now the last poll, people can't say that they don't know. So I think kudos to you and Martha. We're in class and learning. Now that we have had about case scenario, the benefits, I'd like to hear more from you, Remo, about what is a neat, I mean, Martha started with the good things. I think she was selling us into the webinar, but what challenges are there? What challenges come with implementing SSO?
All right, so like Viola said, there is the other side to every coin, right? Given that you are giving users the ability to log in once, means that to log in once to various applications means that if the login is down or if they cannot log in, now you've added a barrier to, in our case, 3 applications, right? So if our login, our SSO server goes down, that means people cannot now log in into all our applications, right? Which is now like a single point of failure. The interesting bit about this is I don't think this point can be removed. It can just, you can just have measures and ways that you make sure that this server stays up, right? You put things like monitoring on it, and we'll discuss a bunch of those solutions, right? So it's, you can just lessen the point of failure, you cannot remove it outrightly completely, right? The other bit is SSO, implementing SSO is an investment, right? It's an investment in time, it's an investment in resources. We have like an extra server that we have to take care of now and handle more delicately, right?
Yeah.
And then because also it's a single point of entry for a user, it's also a single point of entry for the bad guys, right? So
Yeah.
if your SSO server gets compromised, that means people have entered your city, right? That means access to one server means they have access to, access to one user's credentials means they have access to like 3 user credentials. So you can imagine how that would go, right? So in our case, we have access to, so where it becomes interesting in our case, because platform handles payments, right? So you don't want to play around with things that have payments and things that are a little bit more sensitive about people's test results and things like that. So security is a major one that you have to consider when prepping or when implementing SSO.
So that's like double layers. Because I was thinking, yes, it sounds too good to be true, right? And now after this, I'm not sure. But of course, there has to be a solution to every challenge, I believe.
Yeah, so there are some solutions that we have implemented, right? I'm guessing this is going to be a growing exercise, right? That we go and keep changing with, right? So, but these are the few that currently we're implementing, right? So currently all our apps are built on this thing that we call 12 factors. If you're a developer, you should check it out. If you know about it, it's kind of like very opinionated commandments of how to develop software, right? So it is always have your code checked into version control, write unit tests, always have things like never leave like configurations or passwords in your code, inject them in through like an environment variable and things like that, right? So it's a very nice guide. I think it has been around for a while. So we use that to up our security game, right? And also, we live in a world where now the monitoring tools and alert tools have really superseded, because a lot of the world relies on software. So we have things like Sentry to give us alerts. Right now, we are hosting on DigitalOcean, so we have alerts on our droplets. If we reach certain thresholds of CPU, that alert is sent, right? So that we just mitigate the disaster, right? These alerts happened on things like Slack and things like that. The other bit is because it's secure, right? Because we're trying to enforce security. One bit is all our IPs are whitelisted, right? So the SSO server only talks to the development server, to the platform server and to the testing server, right? Any other request that comes from those servers, from a server outside those 3 is rejected immediately, right? Because we know our application, so we will remove that immediately, right? The other bit is add other factors of authentication, right? If you need to confirm that this is the user, never log in a user without verifying their email address, right? If you're using phone number, send them an SMS so that they can know that it's a user, right? So things like email confirmation, phone number confirmation are now becoming mandatory because you're giving access to various systems, right? And then the other bit that we had to do is you cannot have tokens or sessions that last forever, right? It's just, at this point, it becomes unknown. It becomes a security concern. So your tokens need to expire at some point, right? The user can keep extending them, but they need to expire at some point. You can't be logged into an application forever, right? Either that application keeps pinging back and saying, oh, are you still logged in, right? Or something like that, but you can't give like a token which won't expire. Those are the security risks that you will run into. So those are the few that we're currently using to make sure we're more secure.
So from what I gather, if you're thinking SSO, think high level security. The two are they're inseparable. Otherwise,
Yeah,
you
that
get in trouble.
yes, the two are inseparable. And when you start implementing SSO, is the point you start with security. You start it from the get-go, right? So yes.
Awesome, awesome. We don't want people breaking into our city. Imagine someone having access to all that information about a company. So, and lastly, guys, remember that we were taking questions at the end. We are wrapping up from our end. So, drop your questions in the chat, in the Q&A, and the panelists are getting ready to answer them. But while you do that, we need to hear from Remo, like his closing remarks, really. And it would also be good to hear from Martha, what things you can apply now that you have SSO in place.
Yeah, so like internally, when with the implementation of SSO, it's been very easy for us to support various versions of the application, right?
Yeah.
So not to let the cat out of the bag, but but Tunga is going through the Tunga platform is going through a redesign, right? Because now we have 3 apps. We're trying to harmonize and make them look all the same. So currently in development is a new version, right? And because we have SSO, that means the new design is supported by the same user base, right? So internally, if you're asking PMs to log in, asking clients to log in, and when developers get to log in, right? We do not have to tell you that, oh no, the new design is on server 2, but you have to create an account. Currently, it just works seamlessly, right? So you will send PMs or the talent team saying, all right, everyone has their quick feedback on the new design. And this is possible because right now we're running on an SSO like infrastructure, right? The other example that we have is a client of ours who already has SSO implemented, right? So they have one of those enterprise level SSO apps, right? Have implemented software as a service with trials where if you're on the trial, you're on one server, right? Until you pay, and then your user is flagged, and then you can access the full features on the other server, right? So they don't worry about that. You may see something that you're not supposed to do, or you may have a feature that you're not supposed to have. They have separated that concern because the user is the same, right? So once you pay, you get promoted and you are flagged onto this other side. If you default, that flag is removed, you go back to the free version, your data is the same, everything is nice and clear. So those are the few things that we've seen kind of help us with SSO. Hopefully down the road, we'll find more.
Yeah, and others, the user really doesn't have an idea of what's happening at the back end. So for them, they think, now I'm a premium user, so I can access this. They don't realize that there's even different servers going on in the background. Awesome, awesome. Martha, what would be your words of advice for people like about SSO, at least from implementing it, and what like the lessons you've learned so far?
For the lessons I've learned so far, like as a developer, this is really a good one because in most cases you don't tend to emphasize or like give 100% to security, but with SSO, it's like it's a requirement. It's something that you have to do, like it or not. So it's really a good experience, and then also being able to do like a single authentication, and then you can apply it to different applications. It's really a nice one. So I would say every good thing has a disadvantage, but as we have seen, most of those disadvantages we have like solutions. So I would say like SSO is really a good one, and it's being adopted to like 70% currently. Most of big companies Some of them don't implement them themselves, but they use vendors like Okta. Most companies use Okta to manage that. So it's really a good one if you are working on multiple applications, or even if you have one, but there's a hope of like having another which could require single authentication. I would say SSO is the best way to go.
Awesome, Martha. Thank you for that insight. So we'll get into the questions. We don't have a lot of time. And these questions are to you and Remo. The first one is from Garsmyer, Gasmyr. And he says, why did you add OpenID instead of OpenID Connect? Remo, Martha?
My assumption is this question is coming from the poll that we had earlier, because that's why we had OpenID, right? So, so I think it's just two parts of the same coin. So OpenID is the point that what's called would be like the SSO server, right? And then the clients would have OpenID Connect, right? So in that case, it's exactly what we explained, but through this offering that is OpenID.
Awesome. The second question is, which authorization server do you use at Tunga? Is it an open source AS or an internal AS?
So at Tunga, when we're implementing SSO, we actually ran through a bunch of these. We actually went through a bunch of the options that we had seen earlier, right? But for our use case, we felt like because we have a bit of logic that we need to implement while accessing various systems. So right now we built it internally, and so that's right now it's an internal tool that we are using for SSO.
Then there's one about security and access levels across the different projects. I think in this case, it would be different apps, different platforms. How do you go about that?
I would say based on the solutions we have seen, like you can try to go about that using the two-factor authentication and also other solutions we have, like Remo has discussed. So we always have to be mindful of the security. Hackers will always try, but let's be prepared applying those solutions.
Also, to add on that, we have on our SSO instance, we actually have roles. So like a user will say, we have roles and we can say, all right, this user can access that system, or this user can access that system as an admin or as a client, as a PM, right? So at that point, right, we can revoke your access from one point, right? We can first revoke your access to one particular system and say, all right, we need to like stop this user from doing this or something like that. And we can either remove you solely out of the entire SSO platform and you lose access to all the systems, or we can turn off particular ones and say, hey, look, for this, you don't have access yet, or for this, we need this information. So at the SSO point, we can also manage roles and permissions.
Awesome. And I think one last one, we still have 3 minutes, from a gentleman called Gasmyer. How do you deal with access token privacy? I think you've spoken to it, but if you could further expound on it for him.
So I don't get the question. I will assume. So hopefully my assumption is right. If it's not, you can find us on Slack and we can pick up this conversation from there. Yeah. So my assumption is to talk about how we manage access tokens across all of these, right? So one is the policy that we have is all our tokens are set to expire, right? Unless the user renews the token, right? So once you log into our system, in the background, it keeps pinging the SSO server, right? So asking, all right, is this system, is this token still valid, right? Across all of them, right? So that in the case of where you are removed or you don't have access to the SSO system anymore, it's umbrella effect, right? So once you're removed from one system, it just short circuits you from all the rest, right? And with that currently, with that ping back is how we manage that and say, all right, this user is still valid.
Cool. Lynn, if you could read for us the questions that are in the Q&A.
So the first question we have says, how about magic links? Question mark. How about magic links?
Okay, I think this ties into earlier what Viola had said when she hinted on, all right, me, I can achieve SSO, I have a password manager, right?
Yeah.
Magic links are just helping you log in, right? But your accounts are still not the same, right? So if you go to Slack and you use a magic link, that account is different from when you use a magic link on Zoom, right? Those accounts are still not the same, but yeah, it's just much easier for you to log in.
Okay. Lynn, what are the questions?
Yeah, I don't know if you want me to continue, or we can answer the rest of the questions that are still rolling in at a later date in our Slack channels.
One last one.
But, there are two more
Let's take
questions
one last
here.
question. Yeah.
What is the best strategy to mitigate an SSO breach? I'm trying to be careful not to say SOS.
that was answered. I think that was probably asked before Remo went to the solutions where he mentioned 12 factors, 2-factors authentication, whitelisting IPs. These are what I can think of offhand. But again, we are at the peak of the hour. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to our attendees for making the time and staying with us till the end. It's been a very engaging discussion. And to the panelists, thank you for, I got feedback. Someone said, oh, this was a very insightful discussion. I can now start to think of implementing solutions with SSO in mind. And for the rest of the people, remember, we'll post this in Slack in the Tunga community workspace, in our developer, in our general channel. We'll leave the presentation, and also Remo and Martha are available to respond to any queries, so you can always reach out to them. Thank you again for the webinar, these and the ones that we've had in the past that we've hinted on. Please visit our YouTube channel. We'll also drop a link. Thank you, and we look forward to having you with us for our next webinar. Bye.